Chair now recognizes Professor Kontorovich for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lynch, members of the committee, thank you for having me at the hearing today. My written testimony deals with issues involving the status of the corpus separatum, the structure of waivers under the Act, but I'm going to forego those issues in my comments right now and focus on the objections to moving the embassy, because it seems in a kind of diplomatic version of Augustine's prayer, everybody agrees that the embassy should be moved, just not yet. And so I'm going to focus on those not yets, not right nows. The arguments focus on certain practical concerns whose existence or realism can't really be proven while the waiver is issued, and so they are, in a sense, unfalsifiable. But one interesting thing about the arguments for not moving the embassy, security arguments essentially, is that they have not changed in the 20-some years since the Act's passage, despite the radical change in the security and geopolitical situation in the region. In a sense, they're entirely unresponsive and invariant to political developments. They can be summarized like this. Don't move the embassy until the Palestinians, and maybe the Jordanians and the Egyptians, say it's okay. Don't move the embassy until they agree. This holds American policy. This holds a statute subject to veto and waiver by third countries. In no geopolitical conflict, in no geopolitical dispute, do we give parties, do we give neighbors a waiver on where the U.S. embassy should be. That is to say, maybe Pakistan and India would like the U.S. embassies to those countries to be somewhere else, but we don't ask them. Now, it's not surprising that supporters of the Palestinians come and couch their arguments in national security terms, that is to say, implied threats of violence. Under the terms of the statute, the only reason for not implementing it is national security. The only permissible waiver is national security. Not surprisingly, we come in here national security threats from the Jordanians and the Palestinians. They're in a sense shoehorning their foreign policy and political concerns into this justification. It's not surprising that such threats continue to be made because the Palestinian Authority finds that such threats work. They continue to keep the U.S. embassy from being moved. This means that waiving the Act based on such threats, in fact, invites further threats. Waiver creates its own predicate. I should point out that the security arguments have been significantly undermined by recent developments in the region. The security arguments were first made when the Act was passed over 20 years ago, and they continue to be recited as if nothing has changed. One, the Sunni states, in particular Saudi Arabia, are, as of now, literally at war with Iran. They cannot afford a rift with the United States. The notion that Saudi Arabia would endanger itself, it just shot down yesterday a Iranian-provided missile with a Patriot missile battery. The notion that it would endanger the air security of Riyadh over the embassy issue is preposterous. The notion that Jordan would expose itself to ISIS threat because of the Jerusalem embassy issue is preposterous. So there's been a fundamental realignment in the Arab world. 20 years ago, when people said the Arab street is going to explode, that meant one thing. Now I would point out the Arab street has already exploded, principally internally. We need not fear riots against the U.S. in Damascus. The U.S. no longer has diplomatic representation there. Benghazi happened not because of the Jerusalem embassy. In other words, there are people committed to keeping America out of the Middle East already. They are fully incentivized. U.S. embassies in the area are constantly under threat. There was a threat this year to the embassy in Cairo. Indeed, in 1998, 2 U.S. embassies in Africa were blown up in Tanzania and Kenya. The response of the United States was not to cut and run and say, wow, there are people who threaten violence to our presence here, we might as well leave. The response by Congress was to appropriate nearly $1 billion for embassy security and of the executive to hunt down the perpetrators and ensure that they come to justice. That's the American response. There is no other situation in which threats to embassies, especially to a major ally, are a reason for not having diplomatic representation in a country's capital. In particular, this has a very bad consequence for the peace process because it puts Israel in a special, unique category where its existence, its sovereignty over its capital, is only provisionally recognized. It's recognized with a question mark. Right? Israel is a country in a class of one. That undermines the peace process. Moreover, the Palestinians base their claims to a state to the Jordanian and Egyptian conquest of areas of the British Mandate in 1949. Large parts of Jerusalem, including potential locations for the embassy, are not in those areas illegally conquered by Jordan and Egypt, and the Palestinians have no conceivable claim to them. Waiting for tying this to the peace process makes the Palestinians' eyes bigger than their plate and gives them an appetite for that which they could not potentially have, and fundamentally undermines the peace process.
Thank you.